Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that there will be spoilers today, but for a film like this, I don't think it really matters. So The Exterminator came out on September the 10th, 1980. That was just 3 days after I was born. It's quite weird to me to think that when my parents drove me out of the hospital for the first time, they may have been passing bus stops with pictures of the Exterminator on them in his full welder's gear. But as to whether that makes me feel like I've got a spiritual connection with this movie, absolutely not. For many reasons, but first and foremost, this was my first watch of the movie this week. Although I did see the second one way back when I was about 10. We rented it out from a video store, though all I remember of that is a guy running around with a flamethrower, and I remember the death of the villain, the Exterminator tricking him into opening a bag with a bomb in it. I've never forgotten that, and yet it's taken me over 30 years to finally getting around to watching any of these films again. In the case of the first one, for the first ever time. If you're wondering why we rented number 2, by the way, and not number 1, so me and a friend had this belief when we were kids that the bigger the number next to a film, the better it would be. So if there were like 5 Police Academy films on the shelf, you'd have to rent number 5 because that had the biggest number. It was the newest film. It was going to be the best. Same with like Rocky. Like I can remember deliberately choosing to persuade my dad to let me rent Rocky 4 just because it was the biggest number out of the ones available. So therefore it had to be the best, right? As I've got older, completely change. Nowadays I'll always try and see the original film first and work my way up, if you see what I mean. But my biggest surprise watching Exterminator 1 is that it doesn't really feature a flamethrower that much. I thought that's what this entire series was, Death Wish with a flamethrower. But apparently that's just number 2. In the first film, he only gets a flamethrower out for like 1 minute and he doesn't even use it. He just uses other weapons throughout the movie. So to give you an idea of the plot for this, it's very simple. We've got a guy who used to serve in Vietnam, but now he's come back to America. He's getting on with his life for the most part. He's got himself a job. But then one of his best friends is brutally murdered by some local punks, and this just tips this guy over the edge. He decides to become a vigilante, and he goes around killing people who he thinks deserves it, not just the people who killed his friends, but other bad people as well. So this is essentially a Death Wish clone. It would fall under Death Wish ploitation, if that was a word. Maybe vigilante ploitation would be a better word, maybe, but that's what this is. It falls under the Death Wish copycat sort of banner. It's just a much more gorier, bloodier version. But that doesn't mean that it's a better movie than Death Wish. Not even close, actually. The level of violence in this film was really shocking to me. I don't remember part 2 being as cruel and as explicit as this one. When I look back on that memory of watching Exterminator 2 with my dad, I don't remember there being much discomfort in the room as to the fact that I was watching this stuff. But had we been watching number 1, I've got a funny feeling that my dad might have stood up after 10 or 20 minutes and said, no more. Because, yeah, this is an extreme film a lot of the time. And the kills that the Exterminator does, they're almost like torture sequences rather than just outright murders. I was actually reminded less of Death Wish at times watching this than I was the horror film Don't Go in the House, where you've got this killer who brings women into his residence, ties them up, and then burns them alive when the victims can do nothing about it. The Exterminator does a lot of that. He's just using a wider variety of weapons, but at times it just made me feel a little uncomfortable. Like, I don't really want you to kill people in this way when they're immobilized and they can't fight back. And a lot of the time there's the question of, do they even deserve a fate this bad based on what they did originally? There's one part of this film in particular that I'm thinking of when I say all this. So the Exterminator gets this mob boss and he's got him chained up above it like a meat grinder, and then just slowly lowers him into it with all the carnage that brings. And I'm just gobsmacked thinking, oh, okay, This guy's a mob boss, I get it. He's probably a huge crook. He's not somebody who's of any benefit to society. Does he belong in prison? Probably. Does he deserve a bullet to the head? Maybe. Okay, if you're going to give him that, fine. But lowering him into a meat grinder is so OTT. I was reminded a little bit of the James Bond film Licence to Kill. Now, this isn't exactly comparing apples to apples, but this is a Bond film that just happens to also be about revenge at its core. And there's also a scene involving a grinder. Bond has a scuffle with this guy and the villain goes into the grinder. But when I'm watching that, it's like, yeah, ha. But with the grinder death in The Exterminator, I'm just kind of appalled. I'm like, you didn't have to lower him into that. You had him tied up and immobilised. That's just so beyond cruel. Like, I feel like in a film, the punishment has to at least match the crime to a certain degree. And if anything, the punishment should often be less than the crime, just to show that the protagonist has more about them, character-wise, than the villains. But throughout The Exterminator, there were certainly 2 or 3 times where I was just taken out of the film a little bit, thinking, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the extent that you're punishing these people. It's a little bit why I've never really enjoyed the I Spit on Your Grave films, those types of things, because again, with those, the nature of the deaths are just so extreme compared to the original crimes. And I'm not trying to make light of rape or anything like that, but with this movie, at times I just wanted to go back to that safe haven of Death Wish and just people shooting each other in the streets. And yay, you got one over them there, Charlie. This was directed by James Glickenhaus, a director for whom a lot of his early movies all sound kind of similar to each other. So he did such films as The Astrologer, The Soldier, The Protector, The Exterminator. And I like to think that these are not just all revenge porn movies where the job title of the protagonist just changes slightly each time. Surely not, but I've certainly never seen any of these other films that he did. I've not seen anything that this guy has done, actually, apart from The Exterminator. Robert Garrity is the guy who plays the lead role here. Again, somebody I'm not massively familiar with, but as far as I can tell, he used this film as a springboard to go on and do a lot more action stuff throughout the 80s, but I think his career kind of faded eventually, and he never made it to the mainstream. He's so-so in this film. He's just about believable as a guy losing his shit and going around being totally awful to the world's crooks and hoodlums. But the problem is there's no character journey with this guy. He's angry that his friend died, so now he kills and tortures. Cause and effect. We go from one thing to the other. There's no real journey or development in between that leads from the one to the other. You get none of the nuance of the Paul Kersey journey from Death Wish. Like Garrity, he does no soul searching. He's not out on dates trying to concentrate on a woman at the same time he's thinking about what crimes he's going to commit at night time. We don't see him buying weapons and being all fidgety about that. We don't see him worrying about how he's going to avoid the police. We don't see him going off to an Arizona gun range to practice his skills before he goes out into the jungle. You don't get any of that stuff that would make it a story, potentially. It's just a guy whose friend died and now he's going to be angry. And the best example I can give of this is that we have a scene where his friend dies, and then in the very next scene, pretty much, we go straight to Garrity. He's already got some guy chained up and he's about to burn him alive. We've gone from that to that. We just can't be bothered with any of that story stuff that might connect those scenes, because that stuff would be difficult to write, apparently. The villains in this film are truly vile, with the possible exception of the mob boss. He's kind of an anomaly, actually, in the rogues gallery of The Exterminator. But everyone else is a truly awful human being in this. But I think that's deliberate in order to justify the extremes that The Exterminator then goes to, and the writer of this film wants The Exterminator to be extreme. That's kind of the point of this project. But yeah, you get some horrible people in this. There's a gang called the Ghetto Ghouls, and they're all basically racist. They're just loosely throwing the N-word around in a really horrible way. As a little aside, I find the name of this gang really out of sync with the tone of this movie, the Ghetto Ghouls. It sounds like something more suitable for a film like The Warriors. I'd actually go a little bit more left field than that. I'd say that it belongs more in a film like The Mighty Ducks. I could imagine a young hockey player saying to his coach, Emilio Estevez, "So who are we playing in the championship match?" And then Estevez saying, "Well, I can tell you that we're going to be playing the Ghetto Ghouls from Brooklyn." Ooh. But having that name for a gang in this movie just feels slightly off-key, but it's not the biggest crime of this film. And then we come to a ring of paedophiles that turn up halfway through this film, because Garrity has already taken care of most of the Ghetto Ghouls by this point, so we need new villains. Yeah, these paedophiles are just beyond the pale, and it's not enough for them to just be paedophiles and rapists. They also have to be the sort of characters who would kidnap young boys between the ages of like 6 and 10 to just use and abuse. And even though we don't see anything revolting, just the implication that this kind of activity is happening in this world, it did kind of make me feel like I needed a wash after watching this section of the movie. And actually, this is one part of The Exterminator where I didn't mind the level of retribution dealt by The Exterminator, if you see what I mean. And then we come to the granny bashing late on, so there are a few extra members of the Ghetto Ghouls, it turns out, and they start mugging people. And yeah, we can't just have it be like a woman in her 20s or 30s getting brutally assaulted on the street. No, that they've got to up the ante and make it like a frail old granny. You've got these 3 dickheads just beating on her, and again, it's just another example of this film just desperate to go to the next level, to just kind of give you that shock and awe. I think I've just about said everything that I wanted to. It might surprise you to learn that I still enjoyed chunks of this movie despite everything that I've said, but I certainly didn't get the nostalgic trip down memory lane that I thought I was going to get. I thought this would be a lot like films that I used to watch when I was a kid, and it just wasn't. I don't remember Exterminator 2 being anything like this experience of Exterminator 1, so I'm almost doubly curious now to see what that second film is like. And in the next few weeks or so, I will find out. But it might end up being a similar experience to what I had with Cyborg, with Jean-Claude Van Damme, because that's a film that my dad let me rent when I was a child, and I thought it was amazing. And then I went back to check it out again when I was in my 30s, and it was like, whoa, what is this? It looks horrible, and I couldn't make it past the first half an hour. I wonder if Exterminator 2 will end up being a little bit like that, but we will see. But for now, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I am going to score the original Exterminator. So we've got 1 and 2 Michael Myers carving knives out of 5. I wish I had a couple of mini flamethrowers or something, but sadly not. So we'll leave it there for today. I'll be back very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.